Welcome back. I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker. If you have been in the lab for any length of time, this will be a familiar face. I'm really excited to have Nate on again today. He is a leadership consultant, TEDx speaker, and the creator of Living Systems Leadership, which is a leadership framework based on nature. So without further ado, I'll let Nate kind of jump in to discuss why your system might be producing the wrong behavior. And if you have any questions throughout, you can drop them in the Q&A and I will do my best to make sure that they get answered during the stream. And we'll also have kind of a Q&A session at the end. So awesome. Everyone welcome Nate.
Thank you, Brittany. Okay, so today we're going to talk about why your systems keep producing the wrong behavior. And just to be clear, when we say wrong behavior, we don't mean in the absolute term, right? So there's no absolute wrong, there's no absolute right behavior. In this context, we mean wrong behavior as in you have a vision or goals for your department or your organization, and the behaviors are working against that vision or that goal. So they're only wrong for you in that sense. So a lot of times when we think about leadership, we hear mindset, we hear worldview, the lens, how you see things. So today we're going to kind of pick up on that theme because I think that's very important. And we're going to refer to it a little bit differently. We're going to refer to it as an orientation in terms of how we see the world and how we see leadership and how we see our teams and our role within it. But before we get started, just quick housekeeping. Brittany sort of covered this. Why should you even care or listen to what I'm saying? I'm Nate Payne. I've been in IT for 30 plus years, held pretty much every role from installing hard drives and memory for 700 computers back in the mid 90s. It's kind of how I got started, to running IT organizations internally as IT director for a number of firms. And then ultimately I went out and started my own MSP about 9 years ago. And then over the past 4 or 5 years, really, I've been working in this space, IT leadership and focusing on that. And then ultimately came up with this thing I call Living Systems Leadership, which, to be clear, is not mine. These are principles that we find in nature. I didn't invent any of this stuff. The whole premise is that if we're looking at systems that give birth to behaviors, and those behaviors are what determine our outcomes, then we probably want to focus on our systems. And there's no greater example of sustainable, long-lasting systems than the systems we find in nature. So that's the connection when we talk about living systems leadership. The challenge or the problem that I needed to solve when I was internal IT, I was able to build relationships. The CIO knows you, the CEO knows you, the people, they know you, and over time you build trust. And so your recommendations hold a little bit more weight based on that currency of trust that you've built up. When I went into the MSP world, I didn't have that advantage. The people, the business owners didn't really know me for extended periods of time. So I had to find a way to show the value of technology to their organization, specifically my recommendations, why that would work for them and why it mattered. And so the old way of doing it over time, building trust and making it more about personality, I had to find something different that would work. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how do you build that trust in the organization laterally with the other business unit leaders, and then also with the C-suite. So orientation is, I look at it, think about this. Imagine that you were dropped in the middle of the wilderness and all you had was a compass and a map. And your job was to get from where you are back to, home base or base camp or something. What would you do first? Now, I'm going to guess that you probably wouldn't just get up and start walking. Right? You would take a moment. You would find north on the compass, maybe align the map, the top of the map to true north, right, in the real world. And then you would start to orient yourself to the landscape. And then and only then would you start to actually move. And so today, this is what we want to do. We want to make sure that we orient ourselves to the landscape of leadership and make our way back to home base. Now, home base will be different for all of us because all of us have a different vision and idea of where we want to go in our careers, how we want to help our teams and our organizations to grow. So there are 5 steps. Think about this. If you were heading back to base camp, you probably wouldn't walk and take it all in one step. You would want to break it up into chunks, if you will. We're going to go from this point to this point, then we're going to sort of make sure we're heading in the right direction, and then we're going to take another short distance and we're going to make our way back in that way. And today we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take 5 short mini journeys back to where we're trying to get to as leaders. The first step of our journey is operating system. Then we'll talk about leadership and what does it really mean. Incredibly important that we share common terms when we're discussing leadership. The power of relationships, function versus purpose, and then we'll kind of close out with a very exciting lesson on applied economics. Okay, so the operating system. Imagine you wanted to create or build a piece of software. Your consideration, even though you didn't really care, would be the operating system that application had to run on. So whether it's Windows or iOS or Linux, what have you, it's incredibly important to understand what that software will run on because each operating system has its own set of rules and constraints around hardware, memory, resource allocation, and things of that nature. And if you ignore those, that application is going to crash, it's going to be buggy, it's not going to perform the way that you want it to perform. And so in our lives, in leadership, we don't often think about the operating system that we work within. And that operating system is reality. See, we tend to start on the application layer. We think about our strategy, which is important. We want to build a healthy culture. We want to align our goals with organizational goals and priorities. We worry about execution, getting things done on time and on budget. And all of those things are incredibly important. But what decides whether they're successful or not is how well those things are aligned to the rules of the operating system. And just like any operating system, reality has a set of rules of its own. If we start to build our leadership approach, career, call it what you want, without taking into account those rules, those constraints of reality, we're going to have a very tough time being an effective leader. So what are those constraints and what are those rules? Well, first, everything is connected to everything. When you make a change, that change impacts something else. Doesn't mean that we necessarily are aware of what it's impacting, but it absolutely affects something else because our organization, our team, everything really is a system. So this is where we would say, okay, well, if everything is connected to everything, what does that mean to me? Why is that important? And how do I respond as a leader to this particular constraint or rule of the operating system? So the response is this. I need to know when I press a button here, what might happen over here, because there will be ripple effects, right? And they're not necessarily in a straight line. So as a leader, one of the most important things, and in our extended workshop, we would go into exercises where we would map relationships within our organization. Because again, I don't know what might happen if I make a change in this space. If I don't understand what depends on that, the relationships, the interactions of this particular thing with the other elements of that system. So one of the advantages, I believe, in understanding the rule that everything is connected to everything is that it sort of causes you now to say, okay, as I start planning and thinking about things, I really do need to have a map of the relationships within my organization, the dependencies and the connectivity between the different business units. The next uh, rule, if you will, is cognitive load is finite. People can only hold so much information in their heads at one time, right? So if we overload our team with priorities, or we're constantly pulling them into meetings or asking them to switch context, here's what happens: the mistakes will go up, the performance will go down. Well, my old boss, one of my mentors, he, and I don't know if this is true factually, but he would say, you know, if you're in the middle of something and you're in deep focus and someone comes along and interrupts you, it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes for you to get back to that space of deep focus. So if you were to be interrupted 10 times during the day, you could lose almost 2 hours of productivity purely from interruption. So that's one point. The question now becomes, in how do we respond to this particular rule or constraint? And so one of the things that we teach is that we carve out or block out time for deep work. This is time that it's not negotiable. Right? Now, it may not apply to everyone on your team, but it should also apply to you as a leader. And it goes something like, unless the house is on fire, do not interrupt, right? So this does two things. It allows you that time that you need to reflect and respond to things uninterrupted, because we're adhering to the rule here: cognitive load is finite. But here's the other backside to it that really I wasn't expecting, that turns out to be really cool. When I'm not in that space, when I'm not in that blocked out time, and I have all these fires and these things coming at me, I can be totally focused on taking care of those issues, right? I'm not distracted by, oh, you know what? I still have this thing that I need to do over here, because I know that I have allowed myself space at some point in my day, in my week, to address that. So it allows me to be more present as a leader because I intentionally leave that space. And your team will feel the same way. I think what you'll find is that the mistakes will be less, and they'll actually be more productive, although sometimes it seems counterintuitive. People act in their own self-interest. If you've been on the IT Leadership Lab, you've probably heard me say this, I don't know, like 100 times. Um, I have to repeat this because this is one of those things. If you miss this, uh, it's really hard to get your team, senior leadership, and other people in the organization on board with anything that you're doing. It, and I don't say that people act in their own self-interest to be cynical. It can actually be a really good thing. Right? So for some people, acting in their own self-interest means I help people because I feel really good when I'm able to help others. So they are acting in their own self-interest because they're getting something good out of it, which is that good feeling, but they're actually helping other people. So it doesn't mean people act in their own self-interest is something that should be looked at as being a negative thing. But it is a constraint and a rule of that operating system. And if we take it into consideration in the way that we frame things when we speak to others, we're going to be a lot more convincing. So, for example, we need new core switches at headquarters. That's great. And we do, right? Maybe they're old, maybe there's security issues, maybe a lot of the ports are dead, any of those things. But if I'm going to go talk to my CFO or I'm going to go talk to the person who has the budget and I'm trying to convince someone that we need new switches at headquarters, I'm probably not going to say that we need new switches because they're old or that the ports are dead. I'm probably going to frame that based upon what I know is important to them because I know people act in their own self-interest. So I need to make a connection between what I care about, what I know needs to be done from an IT perspective, and connect that, translate that into some type of meaning for the person who has to make the decision. So that's one way. We reframe our conversations. It makes us a lot more convincing in terms of getting buy-in from other stakeholders. The second thing that adhering to this rule does is that it allows us to put policies and things in place that align with the rewards and penalties, if you will, within our organization. So one of the first things I like to ask when I go into a place, and I ask this of the leader, I ask this of the team, uh, tell me what gets rewarded around here? Because what I'm really asking is, what are the incentives in this organization? And what we're trying to determine is, do the incentives, whether they're spoken or unspoken, do they align with what you as the IT leader have as a goal? So, for example, I want to build a team that is collaborative. I want to, my team doesn't cooperate enough. I want to have more cooperation. Okay. Do the incentives reward cooperation or do we reward individual excellence? And there's nothing wrong with rewarding the individual excellence. But if I know people act in their own self-interest and they watch you give a pat on the back to the person who went off on their own and completed the project and you celebrate them, well, I want to be celebrated. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm not going to cooperate with the team. I'm going to go off on my own. And so I'm actually encouraging the type of behavior that I don't want. So this particular rule, this constraint of the operating system, people acting in their own self-interest, helps you when it's time to design those incentives for your team to make sure that what you say you want, that the incentives that you have in place align with those. It takes a lot of the pressure off of you because now the system is carrying the weight and not you. Feedback takes time. feedback is one of the most important things. You know, we talk about communication and those things, but this is a lesson from nature. I talk a lot about forests and trees. If you've heard me talk before, I get this directly from forests. Okay, like this is not really a leadership thing. I just apply the principle. So when you go into that forest, the first thing you notice is, you know, the canopy, right? Oh, wow, look at all these leaves, the trees. It's beautiful. It's great. But those leaves are really acting like sensors, right? They're sensing what's going on in the environment, temperature, wind, humidity, and they're transmitting that information down through the branches of the trunk. Simultaneous to that, the roots under the soil are doing the very same thing across all of the trees. It's absolutely amazing. And it's all in real time. This is why in nature you don't really see a lot of what we like to call transformation, because nature is always adapting. So you say, well, what does that mean for me as an IT leader? Well, we have to realize that feedback doesn't always show up like on time. Sometimes there are delays, and we have to give space for those feedback delays. Otherwise, what we end up doing is overreacting, right? We swing things too far this way to compensate and realize, oh, uh-oh, you know, bad signal. And now here I am trying to swing things back to the other side and to overcorrect. But the other part about feedback taking time, if I realize that, now I'm going back to designing my system, that maybe I want to design my system so that the intervals of feedback are a little bit closer together. So maybe instead of having a 1 hour weekly meeting, maybe I have a 5 minute stand up. And I sort of equate this to a football huddle. It doesn't need to be a full blown, you know, meeting. It's just what plays are we running today? What is the defense doing? Okay, break. And then we go out and run the play. But feedback and building that in intentionally is incredibly important. I can't respond. I can't adapt. I can't be all of the things that I need to be when I don't know what's going on. And we can't leave that to chance. We have to purposely design that into the system, because the system, if we remember, is what drives the behaviors, and the behaviors drive the outcomes that we want. And then every decision is a trade-off. This was probably the hardest lesson for me. I wish I would have had this when I first started in my leadership career. We tend to think of decisions as decisions, but it's so much better to think of them as trade-offs, right? And I think of Jack and the Beanstalk. It's like, as long as you're not trading the cow for 3 beans, you're probably doing okay. But the question I'm going to ask is not, oh, you know, what are you going to do? The question becomes, is this a good trade? Right. So my grandson, he does these Pokemon cards. Okay. I know nothing about Pokemon cards, but he'll tell you he's not trading a black one for a gold one or this one for that one. He can tell you why. And he has some value established some kind of way. I don't know because he can't even read, but some kind of way he's established value to these cards, and he will not make a bad trade, which is really just he's making a decision. So sort of reframing decisions as trade-offs. And remember, whether it's time or money or whatever, I'm trading something for something else. And if you can justify that as being a good trade, then it's a lot easier now to get your recommendations accepted, to get buy-in from stakeholders, because instead of it seeming like a burden, it becomes a very simple thing, right? Is this, you know, 2 of these worth 3 of these? And that's really how you're framing your decisions. Okay, number 2 is defining leadership. And I talk about this a lot because what is a leader, right? And if you ask 20 people, you're going to get 20 answers about what they think leadership is. And to be fair, it's not one particular thing. Okay. The problem has come up and maybe over the last 30 years or so, is that we've taken leadership and we've sort of made it a product, right? We kind of package it and we brand it and then we market it. And the problem comes in is that, well, okay, every so many years it needs a refresh. And so we come up with a new name and we come up with new packaging. And, what used to work 5 years ago or 10 years ago doesn't work anymore. And it's this sense of like we're constantly chasing what it means to be a good leader, and how to become a better leader. And so this is what I equate it to is like a puzzle. So it was really cold here in Texas a couple of weeks ago. So I was actually doing a puzzle, which is where this idea came up. And so you're constantly going back and forth between the pieces and the cover on the box. And I thought, wow, what if I didn't have this box cover? What if I didn't know all I had were pieces? Could I still put the puzzle together? And probably yes, but it would take a lot more time if I didn't know what the finished product should look like. And this is kind of what happens to us in leadership today. Um, we have all these pieces, and all of the pieces belong, but nobody shows you what the whole thing looks like when it's all put together. And so it leaves us feeling a little bit lost, maybe not feeling as confident as we should. Um, and it's all because of how we define leadership. So, living systems leadership, the main point here, and I'm going to go back to the forest. When you walked into the forest, you saw the canopy. In that forest, there's no chief tree. There's no head of bushes and vines. Everyone's just sort of working together, and leadership, if you will, is distributed across the entire structure. As a leader, your job is not to become an exceptional individual. It's really not even helpful to the company. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that personal development is not important, which is probably why you guys are on this call right now, is because you do. You care about getting better as a leader. Yes, those things are important. But the idea that you are to be exceptional, a hero, right, a superstar in some kind of form or fashion is not real sustainable leadership. With living systems leadership, we go the other way. We say that your job as a leader is to become a designer of conditions. And not just any old conditions, but conditions that cooperate with what it is that you're trying to accomplish as a leader. So, what I mean by that is this: there are some plants that grow very well here in Texas that, if I was in Minnesota, wouldn't do so well. So, the conditions are going to dictate the behaviors and then ultimately the outcomes. So, you're looking at your team, you're looking at their skill set, you're looking at the objectives that you want to achieve within the IT organization, and you're balancing those against the organizational priorities. And you're saying, okay, I'm going to start designing on purpose a system that automatically allows these certain behaviors to emerge on their own. And we've talked about some of these, right? Around the way that we design our feedback intervals, uh, recognizing that people act in their own self-interest. So making sure that our incentives and the constraints that we put in place are in line with what we're trying to accomplish. All of these things are acts of a designer, a leader who sees themselves more as a steward than a person who needs to be in control. Okay. Number three is relationships and the power of relationships. The first relationship that you have is with yourself, which sounds simple enough, but if you don't believe in you, no one's going to believe in you. But what can I say? I can't say, oh, just believe in yourself. It's not an order or command, and you go, oh, okay, cool, and you just believe in yourself. It doesn't happen that way. So here's an example, true life example of how you can kind of believe in yourself um, through, through a surrogate, if you will. I'm a terrible cook. I'm a terrible baker. You never want me in a kitchen. So if you assigned me a project to bake a cake, make some cookies, I'm not going to feel very confident in myself about delivering that outcome. However, if you were to give me a recipe, here are the ingredients, Nate. Here's the measure of the ingredients. Here's how you mix them together. Here's how you preheat the oven. Here's how long you leave the cake or cookies in there. Here's how you test them, take them out. Here's how you do. Okay. All of a sudden I go, yeah, okay, I think I can do this. I, I'm not confident in myself. I'm confident in that recipe that you just gave me. And that is the power of having a strong system because it doesn't all come back to you. This is where I rely on living systems leadership because it's based on nature. I know nature is right. Nature's not going to be wrong. Nate, he's probably going to be wrong, but nature's never wrong. So when in question, when in doubt, I go back to how does nature do it? What are the principles that support and sustain nature? And then that becomes my recipe as a leader, which that job is to design systems that allow whatever my vision is to come to life. So if you're feeling imposter syndrome, if you're feeling I'm not quite sure, if you're just new to leadership, or you're thinking about getting into leadership, the first relationship and the most important one is with yourself because that transcends out to all the other relationships. And to me, the fastest way to get up to speed to feeling good about yourself is to get a system that you believe in, that you know works. That's your recipe, if you will, for success. The next relationship that you have is with your team. And again, this is going back to the idea of a network and the way that you design those feedback loops. How much autonomy do you give them? Does every decision come back through you? And if it does, why do you feel it needs to do that? Right? What's going on in the system that makes you feel that every decision needs to come back to you? Again, it's not personal. It's just we know the system is what produces behaviors, even for us. So when you have a question about why you're behaving a certain way, just look at the system, and then we find out, oh, this is why, and then we make the adjustments. The next relationship you have is with senior leadership, and this is where we start kind of acting almost like a translator, where we sit in the middle. Right. So, senior leadership is kind of giving us the priorities of the organization. And you're trying to translate those almost like from the top down to the team. But the team has concerns as well and challenges. And you're trying to communicate those upward to senior leadership. But again, when you have a model, when you have a system, and you're following the parameters, the constraints, the rules of that operating system, the conversation you have with senior leadership, it totally changes. They see the confidence, and it's not arrogance confidence. It's no, this is how life works. This is how reality works, and that's why I know that this recommendation in this direction is going to work. So that third relationship with senior leadership, these are the two that we balance, and then of course the last one is just with the organization itself. Where we feel our place is there. Do we feel like we belong there? What can we contribute to the organization? And then in turn, what does that organization doing that work do for us? So start with you, because no matter what's going on with your team, you say, oh, the board, they won't listen to me. The CEO doesn't respect me. there's something going on with that system. Something is there, and you start there. It's never personal around um, the behaviors. Those behaviors are emerging from somewhere. Maybe it's a belief or what have you. Okay, number 4, function versus purpose. So I'll just give a quick analogy of what I mean by this, and then we'll talk about why this is important. So we have a clock, and it performs a function, which is to keep the time. But that's not the purpose of the clock. So if we take a look here, we have a guy running. So the guy running, he wants to measure improvement, right? You have the mom picking up her daughter from school. She doesn't want the daughter waiting around in the middle of the street, wondering where she is. You have a group of people back here meeting for dinner. And well, we all want to be together at the same time. So the purpose of the clock is to help us coordinate our lives. That's the benefit that we get from it. But the function is to keep the time. And I say this because sometimes we get lost. We get lost in the day-to-day. We get lost in the function, right? We keep the systems going. We're trying to come up with innovative ways, especially now everybody wants AI implemented. But we focus more on the clock than we do on what we're really here to achieve. Okay, so when you think about it, the clock and what we do in that function is absolutely important to the business. But if we only see ourselves as a function and we lose sight of that greater purpose, I compare it to this. And I don't know how many of you guys out there play video games, but if you think about, there's these games called like a first person shooter, right? And I never could play those very good. It's like it's too tight. I feel claustrophobic. I have no peripheral vision. It's very tight, and everything is like right here in front of you. It's very personal. That's how a lot of us sort of spend our days, in that tight frame, just, all the bullets and everything coming at us, and we're just trying to run or defend or shoot back or whatever. Um, and that's a very functional way of looking at the job of a leader. But there are times when we need to step out to third person, which was one of my favorite games, which was Splinter Cell. But anyway, and see what's going on around us in a larger environment. And so here's what that means in real life. And I think I shared this story before, but if you haven't heard it, so I was working for affordable housing company in California a number of years ago, and they built senior housing. And it was a Friday night, and I had to stop by the property management office at this senior facility. It was my last stop before heading home. Friday traffic, San Francisco Bay Area. I don't need to say anymore. I just wanted to get in there and get out. So I get in there. The problem wasn't as big as I thought it would be. Solved it. I'm ready to go. One of the nice ladies who worked or who lived there, one of the tenants, she comes to me and she says, every Friday we do this potluck in the lounge. We'd love for you to come. And I just didn't really want to go. I wanted to go home and fight this traffic and get to my weekend. And that voice just said, no, just stay. So I did. I stayed for a couple hours. Great time, great conversations. What I didn't realize at the time is I was living in and experiencing and witnessing my purpose, not moving all the stuff to a data center, not determining what network we're going to put across 180 different locations. That was the function, right? I was focusing on this. I thought that was my job. And that night, what I saw was that my purpose, who I was actually helping, what problem I was solving. And I never lost that picture of that conversation that Friday night. And so, again, still not really knowing what I was doing, I sort of had this rotation where the people on the IT team would periodically go out and they would join that group at that particular site for potluck on Fridays so that they could get a sense of it's not just answering help desk tickets or driving out to a site to help somebody because the printer's not working, that you are here for a bigger purpose. Okay. Applied economics. We typically don't think of ourselves as economists. I never did, right? But if you think about economics, one of the, I guess, sort of standard agreed upon definitions goes something like the allocation of scarce resources which have alternate uses. And you say, well, what does that have to do with me? So this picture here is literally a picture of applied economics. The resources that are scarce here is the water because the bucket is finite. Those resources can be consumed in a number of ways. We have plants here that are wilting. We have a farmer here who wants to wash his hands before he goes to lunch. We have an animal over here who is thirsty. So how do we allocate the water? This is the question that every leader, and it's not even just in leadership, it's like in your whole life, this is always the question. You are an economist. We're just never taught that we are. You are constantly allocating scarce resources. Number one is your time. And I say time is number one because it's the only one you cannot get back. Once you spend it, that's it. So as leaders, oh, sorry, my slides went crazy on me. We'll get back to this. Okay. So as a leader, our bucket of water, our scarce resources that we have to allocate, I call them the 4 T's. It's time, it's talent, treasure, which is our budget, and our tools. And so the answer to the question about how do we allocate this water is directly impacted by the organizational priorities. They tell us how to do it. This is the single most important thing in terms of changing that conversation. And we've talked about this on live stream before, organizational priorities. What are the goals? Right? We need to understand what those are. We need to understand how they plan to achieve those goals, which we call initiatives. And then we need to understand what our contribution, meaning we IT, what our contribution is to those initiatives. And then how well positioned we are to actually meet that need. And once we've assessed all of those things, we now can see where the gaps are. And those gaps are going to be filled by time, talent, treasure, or tools. And this is the way we are going to frame every conversation that we have, especially budget conversations, because the picture in our head is always this. And this goes all the way back to the slide we had about decisions and trade-offs. This is a prime example here. So do we water the plants? Do we feed the animal, right? Let the animal drink, or does the farmer wash their hands? Do we do all three? There's no right or wrong answer, but this is what allows us to have a different type of conversation. It is not an IT conversation. It is a resource allocation conversation. based upon organizational priorities and the relationships, because we know everything is connected to everything. All right. So if we go back to this picture, if I don't water the plants, the crops, what does that mean? If I don't let the animal drink, maybe I don't have milk. So those are all things that conversations that you have with the key stakeholders that have nothing to do with really technology at all. You're not down in the weeds. And to be frank, it's not really a business conversation yet. The first conversation should be around applied economics. And then once we establish how we're allocating those resources, then we can start making decisions, go a little bit deeper into the weeds around those things. But this is the part that I always got lost on. I never had this. I never really thought in terms of being an economist, but leadership, at least in part, in large part, is an exercise in applied economics. Okay, so quick recap. Our objective today was just to kind of get a reorientation, figure out where we are. You already know where you want to be, and then align ourselves to that, and then begin the process of moving towards that destination, that objective. And so the first thing we did, we looked at the operating system. That is our lens, our worldview, whatever you want to call it. But everything that we do has to be in alignment with that operating system, which in our case is reality. Call it nature, you can call it life, but there are just certain constraints and rules, and your life goes so much smoother and you achieve so much more success with so much less friction when you respect and honor the rules and constraints of the operating system. Number two, sorry, I was looking at the question over here. Define leadership. There's a lot of great leadership books. Read the books, do the personal development. It's okay. What I hope that you take away from this is just don't get caught up that everything has to be on your shoulders. This is the mistake we make, because we can't possibly live up to the target that they've given us. There's just no way it's going to happen. I've been around a lot of great leaders. I've been fortunate in my life, and I can tell you, they didn't meet all of that criteria. They didn't, and they were still great leaders. So when your focus shifts from you, right, how good am I, to, how good is the system that I'm designing, the whole game changes. Now you're not doing it by yourself. You're actually doing what you see in a forest, which is distributing the weight across the entire structure. And you're doing that through relationships. You're doing that through incentives. You're doing that through the way that you design feedback loops in the organization. Function versus purpose. Just keep top of mind. Why am I here? You're really here to solve problems for people, whatever that problem is, right? The problem is so painful to them that they're paying your organization to solve it for them. That's very important work, because they have a lot of problems. Remember the resource allocation thing? They can't solve all their problems, but this one is so important that they're allocating resources towards it. So how does it look for them after, when you've solved that problem for them? Right. So let's not lose sight of that. And let's bring our team into that. Let them experience that it's not just head down on the keyboard and the mouse, right? It's not just remote sessions to fix something. That, no, we're really here to do all these other things to make people's life better, in addition to the function that we perform. And then, of course, lastly, the applied economics, critical. Never forget this. I mean, this is literally like in your life. It's not just about leadership, right? This, you showed up today here instead of doing something else. Okay. You're going to go home tonight and you're going to cook dinner or you're going to do something else. You're always going to be making these trade-offs, which is allocation of scarce resources. Most people just don't think about it. So it's the awareness of it that turns it into action, right? Because you start designing with that thought in mind, and then all of a sudden the behaviors that you want start to emerge. Okay, so we have 10 minutes. Believe it or not, I can't believe I finished all that. Okay, so shoot me questions. I'm going to have to put on my glasses to read these. Seth. Seth says, when you talk about applied economics and the four T's, really like that. Oh, cool. Thank you. How do you operationalize that in recurring decision forums? Do you recommend formal allocation reviews, capacity dashboards, or specific constraints that leaders impose on themselves? Yeah, really good question. Uh, so Seth, here's the thing. I'm not trying to plug myself, but we're trying to build, not try. We are literally building a piece of software that does this. It's based on this model. It is, thank you. But initially, and the running joke here, if you've heard this, all I was trying to do was build a spreadsheet. That's all I wanted to do to address the four T's, right? Because the questions that keep coming up is I would walk into the office and I would say to one of my old CFOs, and I would say, okay, we want to do this. I need to hire a new person. And he would say, well, how do I know you need? Why can't you move some things around? I had no quantifiable way to show him that this is what needed to be done. Um, I could go in deeper offline. If you want to go to natepayne.com, set up a free call with me, I'll dive in and we can talk about kind of like how to structure it. So at least you can get started now building that. But these are the conversations. This is the only way I talk to business owners. I only really have economic conversations with them, right? This is what's important to you. Uh, this is what you need from us. This is where we're positioned to deliver that. And here's what we need to do to get up to speed. And either we can not feed the cow or we can get another bucket of water or somewhere in between. But it makes those conversations so much easier to have when everyone is talking about it from a point of economics. I'm not sure if that answered it, but do feel free. Anybody just wants to talk about their personal, individual issue, just feel free to schedule a time. There's a link on my website to schedule time.
Yeah, I dropped a if anybody needs it, if anybody's interested, definitely go visit there. I also wanted to ask, Nick asked specifically about a leadership certificate for this summit. We do not have one for this summit, but I did want to know if you had any thoughts on leadership certificates or training or things like that that you think people should go through whenever they're getting
Yeah. Okay. So this is not gospel here. This is just Nate Payne's opinion. Okay. So I'm gonna take it from a position of something personal to me. Um, so about 32 years ago, I started taking a martial arts class. Our teacher doesn't give belts. And so my grandson, who just started taking Taekwondo, and he says, well, Papa, what belt are you? I said, well, I don't have a belt. Okay. So nobody cares about the belt. They only care if you can fight. Can you defend yourself? So I'm not discouraging anybody from getting a certification in leadership, but the point is either you can do it or you can't do it, right? And the martial arts is a set of principles. It's not a set of moves. It's not a set of things that you just repeat over and over again. If he goes left, you go right. It's not that. Okay. So living systems leadership is about principles, and there's not 50 million principles because when the pressure is on, you're not going to remember all the principles, right? So read whatever inspires you from a leadership perspective, as long as you take it and put it within reality, it fits within the operating system, beautiful. It's great. Then that means it works for you. So all of those things on those puzzle pieces, they all matter. They all fit. They're all really good. But you can't just have one out there by itself. You need to put them all together and you have to hold them up against the constraints and the rules of the operating system that we all have to live in, which is reality.
Mhm. Yeah, there was also another question. What's the best way to develop the conditions of leadership? If you want to give a preview of your talk tomorrow, I'm not sure if that's something that you're also going to be covering in the workshop.
Yeah. So tomorrow we're going to really talk more about the operating system. And it really starts with just asking questions, right? Because we're all going to be in a different place. We have different organizations. We're in different stages of leadership. We work with different people. Our challenges are different. So we're going to really hammer down on 4 or 5 key aspects of that operating system. And we're just kind of going to ask ourselves a certain amount of questions, almost assess where we are. And then based on those assessments, we're going to have some actionable items to take away. And I will say this, just do one. Like just do one. Don't try to do everything at once. Just do one thing, get really good at that, and then go from there.
Mhm. We had another question come in. You mentioned cognitive load is finite. In your experience, what structural changes most effectively reduce chronic overload at the leadership level? Meeting design, escalation thresholds, delegation clarity.
Yeah. Okay. So in the most basic thing in the real world, a sign on your door that says "Do not disturb" until this time. I'm serious. I used to have one. And it was messed up because they would walk by, like my office had this glass partition there next to the door. So they would come and look at me like a zoo animal or something, like, are you done yet? It's like, I don't see you, I'm ignoring you. So it just in the base level, put a sign on your door that says do not disturb. Make sure that everyone understands what the parameters are. If the house is on fire, then yes, please do that. Structural changes. This is okay. Back to the forest and the canopy. It's the distribution of leadership across. This is how you design for this chronic overload. And here's what I mean. This is you have autonomy with guardrails. And it happens all the time. It's happening right now with all of us. So I don't know who's had lunch yet or who's drinking something or whatever, but if we're going to lunch, you're going to eat and your digestive system is going to digest and you never have to tell it. Your cardiovascular system is working right now. And guess what? You're not micromanaging it, right? It's just happening. It has a certain amount of autonomy. But here's the thing. If you get a stomach ache, oh, there's pain. And now you have to get involved. I have to take, a Pepsid or I have to do something. So this is the same. That's what I say. Nature gives us, gosh, it's like it's right here in front of us in terms of how to distribute leadership across the structure while still maintaining some type of order. Which is incredibly important because we are not advocating for just everybody does their thing and it's a free for all, but it's somewhere in the middle. But building your system to where people have authority close to where they're doing that work, and they feel safe to make a mistake.
Mhm. All right. Well, those are all the questions that came in, and we are right up on time. So, yeah,
Shocker.
yeah, no, it was great. Perfect. It's a perfect end. So, I just want to say thanks again, Nate, for jumping on today. Really appreciate everything that you do in the lab,
No,
that
thank you.
you've presented here. So, just really appreciate all your time, and looking forward to having you on more streams in the future too. So,
Absolutely.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you,
And
Brittany.
then. Yeah, thank you. He also has a workshop tomorrow. There are only a couple of slots left, so definitely feel free to sign up. There are a few more slots available for the morning session too, if you wanted to um, work with Dave Klein in that session. So plenty of options there if you want to get into a small group. So for now, we'll be taking our final 15-minute of the break. 15-minute break of the day. And you can meet us back here in about 15 minutes where we'll be chatting with Amy Sandler, principal coach at Radical Candor, which is going to be a really, really great session.
Yes.
So awesome. Well, thank you
Awesome.
so much,
All
Nate.
right.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.